Hello, and welcome to the Courtenay Turner Radio Hour. It is June 23rd, and this is unfortunately my final radio hour, but it has been truly an honor to be here with you on WWCR Worldwide Radio. And I hope I will be able to return. I hope you've enjoyed this journey. I know I have. It's been truly edifying for me. So I hope it has been for you as well. And if you want to support the work I'm doing and you want to see me return to the radio, then you can head on over to CourtenayTurner.com. That is spelled like Courtenay. So it's COURTENAYTURNER.com. And that's where I have all sorts of ways that you can support my work. You'll see there's my Substack. That's Courtenay Turner's Substack, again spelled like Courtenay. And this is where for $8 US a month, you can get early access to all of my podcasts, and you will also get ad-free podcasts. So they go out to my Substack subscribers first, and then they are also ad-free on my Substack. So that's a great way you can support my work. And I write a lot of articles as well. And actually tonight's show, which I apologize, I did not have much time to really prepare. So we're kind of going to wing it here because I was busy writing this article that I think is over 16,000 words. So it's kind of like a short book. But it is on how sensitivity training paved the way for the Delphi method and how that is basically gone on steroids with algorithmic cybernetic feedback loops now today. So I think it's really important. It's an important topic. It's something that regardless of whether we're aware of it, we're all living through it. And I do think it is manufacturing consensus, right? It's shaping our uniform thought and therefore presents a great threat to our cognitive liberty. And that is why I wanted to do a deep dive on it. So like I said, I apologize. It's going to be more of a wing it. We're just going to chat through tonight. If you want to learn more about it, definitely check out the Substack article. So by the time this is on the radio and by the time I have it up on my podcast, which I will have at my website, you can check if you want to hear it again or watch, then it'll be available on whichever platform you prefer, but you can find those platforms on my website. And you can also follow me on social media. That's a great way you can support my work. Definitely check out all the various podcast platforms I'm on. Hit that subscribe button, turn on your notifications, share it with other people because I am incredibly censored. So I hear all the time whenever I go on other people's shows how, they had never heard of me before and they were really glad to find my work, which is always an honor. But it does indicate that I am quite a bit censored. So definitely share it with people you think would find it of value. And of course, if you would like to go analog, you can send me fiscal support or letters as you wish to Courtenay Turner, 6041 Rural Plains Circle, Suite 110, number 106, Franklin, Tennessee, 37064. Then I also have a Buy Me a Coffee option on my website, a Venmo, that is Venmo at Courtenay, spelled like Courtenay, -Turner, TURNER. And I have a Gives and Go option there as well. And then I have some really great affiliates. We've got the relaxsaunas.com and promo code COURTZ, COURTZ, will get you a discount there. We've got the RNC store. Again, promo code COURTZ, COURTZ, will get you a discount site-wide. And it's a great immune booster. I take those every day, so check that out. Restore with Quartz. We have the phone number on the site, and this is where you can get really incredible technology to help you boost your own stem cells. And then we also have the Magic Die Call, the I Want My Health Back movement, Defy the Grid. This is where you can get your gold and silver impregnated beautiful artwork. They are legal tender though, and we have more states that are adding them. So use your promo code COURTZ, COURTZ. And since we seem to be living in precarious times, it's always good to have some diversification in the market, right? So check that out. And yeah, So we also have myredlight.com, and I love my red light therapy. Again, promo code COURTZ, COURTZ, will get you that discount. And we have all sorts of options at myredlight.com. This is where you can get, there's like the belt, which is a portable one. I've actually worn it during podcasts. And then there's the panels. You can get like a full panel that's almost acts like almost like a tanning bed, right? You're under it and it's over you. And so those are great. Check all of those out. And if there is something there that strikes your fancy and supports my work, that's a win-win for both of us. So, or you can do the direct support option as well. And hopefully I will be able to return to the radio, because this has been such a great experience for me, and hopefully for you as well. So for today's show, I'm going to start with a video. As I said, this is on the Delphi method, which was born out of the RAND Corporation. And for those of you who know my story, I lived in California. I lived in Santa Monica for quite a while. If you're not familiar, I was there for over a decade, and I lived in Santa Monica right near Main Street. I was actually right behind Main Street. And I always thought it was so funny because RAND, it stands for Research and Development. That's where they got the name. But it's actually 1776 Main Street. That's the address. And I just never thought that was a coincidence. That's just a little too odd. But I did live right by there, and I used to walk past it all the time. I actually had a friend who worked there, and he was very idealistic. He had all these great, visions of grandeur of what RAND was doing. I don't think he was quite aware of the origins, but very smart guy, really nice guy. But I think that was kind of the mindset there. They had a very idealistic vision. I actually went to some of their meetings too. They would have these like dinners and networking groups, and they always presented it as being not nonpartisan, although it seemed like that wasn't quite accurate. But so I'm going to play this video so you get a better overview of what the Delphi method is, and you'll see how it ties to sensitivity training, which we have done an episode on this radio hour before. So I think if you've seen that and you're familiar with sensitivity training, it'll be quite evident. But if not, don't worry, we'll unpack it. So let's check this video out.
We are going to talk about the Delphi technique of manipulation. On February 1st in this space, we discussed the Saul-Alinsky, Cloward-Piven, and the Delphi technique, and how these three describe Barack Obama and his success in deceiving and manipulating large groups of people who are ignorant of his methods. Longtime readers of the Times Examiner are familiar with the Delphi technique and are not fooled by liberals and leftists using the technique. Tragically, those Americans unfamiliar with the technique are vulnerable to manipulation and played for fools. They have unknowingly been willful partners in the destruction of our constitutional republic and the demise of personal freedom. The Delphi technique is a modified version of the Communist Re-Education Program developed by the RAND Corporation for the U.S. Department of Defense as a weapon of war. When Jimmy Carter became president and created the U.S. Department of Education, the technique was specialized to manipulate and control teachers. That specialized technique was called the Alinsky method, named for President Obama's mentor Saul Alinsky. The technique was so successful in brainwashing and manipulating teachers to swallow the party line that they modified it further to manipulate students and later parents. The technique is extremely successful and works on every group imaginable except for those who are familiar with the technique and understand what is happening. The Delphi technique is a manipulative method used by governments, organizations, and unions to cause a peer-selected outcome at a meeting, event, or function. It is based upon the Hegelian dialectic of creating one's own opposition in order to manipulate that opposition to a unified consensus. In a group setting, the Delphi technique is an unethical method of achieving consensus on controversial topics. It requires well-trained professionals known as facilitators or change agents who deliberately escalate tensions among the group members, pitting one faction against another to make a preordained viewpoint appear sensible while making opposing views appear ridiculous. The Delphi technique has been and is being used in Greenfield County, the upstate, and across the nation as the visioning process. This is a process through which predetermined policies acquire the appearance of community input before they are presented to the elected governing body as the will of the people. The visioning process is being used successfully on ignorant but well-meaning people to implement UN Agenda 21 to transform cities and towns into sustainable communities in a three-step process. The visioning process, converting the vision into a plan, and implementing the plan through law. Greenville County has already gone through the visioning process and has a plan. Several non-government organizations funded with government and private grants are using the Delphi technique to manipulate gullible citizens to build a false consensus to present a county council claiming citizens want the plan made law. The Delphi technique can be diffused. A group of people who know the Delphi technique can disrupt the Delphi in a group setting. Success is dependent on ignorance of the technique. Remember, this is an unethical, dishonest method used mostly for evil purposes. It must be exposed to as many people as possible. An easy way to disrupt the Delphi is to take a group of informed people to the meeting, make copies of the Delphi explanation to pass out to others, quietly participate in the meeting, and when the facilitator has the group sorted out and ready to break up into smaller groups, ask, "Are you using the Delphi technique?" It will ruin the day of the facilitator and he will not know what to do. If he claims not to know what the Delphi technique is, offer to explain it to him and the group. Be respectful, otherwise you may play into their hands and find yourself labeled as a troublemaker. Here's another article on the Delphi technique. Hopefully this one will make sense, and then you can come up with a good strategy in your head when you come across somebody trying to use it on you. More and more, we are seeing citizens being invited to participate in various forms of meetings, councils, or boards to help determine public policy in one field or another. They are supposedly being included to get input from the public to help officials make final decisions on taxes, education, community growth, or whatever their particular subject matter might be. Sounds great, doesn't it? Unfortunately, surface appearances are often deceiving. You, Mr. or Mrs. Citizen, decide to take part in one of these meetings. Generally, you find that there is already someone designated to lead or facilitate the meeting. Supposedly, the job of the facilitator is to be a neutral, non-directing helper to see that the meeting flows smoothly. Actually, he or she is there for exactly the opposite reason, to see that the conclusions reached during the meeting are in accord with a plan already decided upon by those who called the meeting. The process used to facilitate the meeting is called the Delphi technique. This Delphi technique was developed by the Rand Corporation for the U.S. Department of Defense back in the 1950s. It was originally intended for use as a psychological weapon during the Cold War. However, it was soon recognized that the steps of Delphi could be very valuable in manipulating any meeting toward a predetermined end. How does the process take place? The techniques are well developed and well defined. First, the person who will be leading the meeting, the facilitator or change agent, must be a likable person with whom those participating in the meeting can agree or sympathize. It is therefore the job of the facilitator to find a way to cause a split in the audience, to establish one or a few of the people as bad guys while the facilitator is perceived as the good guy. Facilitators are trained to recognize potential opponents and how to make such people appear aggressive, foolish, extremists, etc. Once this is done, the facilitator establishes himself or herself as the friend of the rest of the audience. The stage is now set for the rest of the agenda to take place. At this point, the audience is generally broken up into discussion or breakout groups of 7 or 8 people each. Each of these groups is to be led by a subordinate facilitator. Within each group, decision takes place of issues already decided upon by the leadership of the meeting. Here, too, the facilitator manipulates the discussion in the desired direction, isolating and demeaning opposing viewpoints. Generally, participants are asked to write down their ideas and disagreements with the papers to be turned in and compiled for general discussion after the general meeting is reconvened. This is the weak link in the chain, which you are not supposed to recognize. Who compiles the various notes in the final agenda for discussion? Well, it is those who are running the meeting. How do you know that the ideas on your notes were included in the final result? You don't. You may realize that your idea was not included and come to the conclusion that you were probably in the minority. Recognize that every other citizen member of this meeting has written his or her likes or dislikes on a similar sheet of paper, and they too have no idea whether their ideas were compiled into the final result. You don't even know if anyone's ideas are part of the final conclusions presented to the reassembled group as the consensus of public opinion. Rarely does anyone challenge the process, since each concludes that he or she was in the minority and different from all the others. So now, those who organized the meeting in the first place are able to tell the participants and the rest of the community that the conclusions reached at the meeting are the result of public participation. Actually, the desired conclusions had been established in the back room long before the meeting ever took place. There are variations in the technique to fit special situations, but in general, the procedure outlined above takes place. The natural question to ask here is, if the outcome was preordained before the meeting took place, why have the meeting? Herein lies the genius of the Delphi technique. It is imperative that the general public believe that this program is theirs. They thought it up. They took part in its development. Their input was recognized. If people believe that the program is theirs, they will support it. If they get the slightest hint that the program is being imposed upon them, they will resist. This very efficient technique is being used over and over and over to change our form of government from the representative republic intended by the Founding Fathers into a participatory democracy. Now, citizens chosen at large are manipulated into accepting preset outcomes, while they believe that the input they provided produced the outcomes which are now theirs. The reality is that the final outcome was already determined long before any public meetings took place, determined by individuals unknown to the public. Can you say conspiracy? These change agents or facilitators can be beaten. They may be beaten by using their own methods against them. Because it is so important, I will repeat the suggestions I gave in the previous column. 1. Never lose your temper. Lose your temper and lose the battle. It is that simple. Smile if it kills you to do so. Be courteous at all times. Speak in a normal tone of voice. 2. Stay focused. Always write your question or statement down in advance to help you remember the exact manner in which your question or statement was made. These agents are trained to twist things to make anyone not acceding to their agenda look silly or aggressive. Smile. Wait till the change agent gets done speaking and then bring them back to your question. If they distort what you said, simply remind those in the room that what he or she is saying is not what you asked or said, and then repeat verbatim from your notes the original objection. 3. Be persistent. Wait through any harangues and then repeat the original question. Go back and reread the previous column. 4. I wish to thank a reader of the previous column for some excellent suggestions. Don't go alone. Get as many friends or relatives who think as you do to go along with you to the meeting. Have each person armed with questions or statements, which all generally support your central viewpoint. Don't sit together as a group. Spread out through the audience so that your group does not seem to be a group. When the facilitator or change agent avoids answering your question and insists that he must move on so everyone may have a chance to speak, your own agents in the audience can then ask questions worded differently but still with the same meaning as yours. They can bring the discussion back to your original point. They could even point out in a friendly manner that the agent did not really answer your question. The more the agent avoids your question, and the more your friends bring that to the attention of the group, the more the audience will shift in your favor. To quote my informant, turn the technique back on them and isolate the change against as the kook. I've done it and seen steam come out of the ears of those power brokers in the wings who are trying to shove something down the citizens' throats. And it's so much fun to watch the moderator squirm and lose his control, all while trying to keep a smile on his face. Now that you understand how meetings are manipulated, let's show them up for the charlatans which they are. Here's an example.
I remember when I went to his bedroom to say goodnight, and he was crying because of the abuse that he was enduring in this school system.
Then why did you stay in Mexico?
You need to leave. It's disgusting.
That's indicative of what these kids are experiencing. That's indicative of what our kids are experiencing. Comments like that. And that's no, he's sharing a story right now. And that's indicative of what our kids are experiencing.
All right, so the way that she painted that picture was a little sinister. It sounds very much like a manipulative type of tactic, and it does seem like that is what it has grown into. The origins of this Delphi technique do come out of Brand Corporation, as I had mentioned, and the whole purpose ostensibly was to forecast the impact of technology on warfare. And, I like to say that it's really easy to predict the future when you plan it. So that's kind of what they were trying to do, right? They were trying to figure out what the long range military defense would look like and what the, ways to plan that out were. So if you go to the RAND website, it says Delphi method. The Delphi method was developed by Rand in the 1950s to forecast the effect of technology on warfare. It has since been applied to healthcare, education, management, and environmental science. Today, groups of experts or stakeholders, we know the UN loves that word, stakeholders use online tools such as Expert Lens to anonymously answer questionnaires, receive feedback that represents the group response, discuss and revise their answers to see whether they can approach expert consensus. And we'll go through the breakdown of how the Delphi method actually works, but it's several rounds of these questions, several, anonymous, where you don't know who the facilitator is. And they do this several times in order to kind of weed out the outliers to try and manufacture consent, right? To manufacture consensus, as they call it, so that you can get expert consensus. But if you truly have individual, unique minds who are, brought together and they're experts in their field, then you would think consensus would actually be pretty difficult to arrive at, right? You're not always going to have them all agree, but that is exactly what this is designed to do. It is to get them to all agree. It's kind of like a peer review, which tends to favor those that are funding it. So that's kind of this method. And we can see how it's really been utilized in every sector of their own admission, right? So the UN uses it, the World Health Organization uses it, local school boards use it. You could go really every institution is using, certainly it's used quite a bit in politics. So I outline a lot of the institutions and the ways that you could achieve institutional capture using this method in my Substack article. So if you want a deep dive on that, definitely check that out. But I wanted to point out how this reminded me so much of sensitivity training. And when you do these meetings in person, so Delphi method is not always done in person, right? But when it is in person, you can really see the similarities. And she even called it change agent. That's the facilitator, is a change agent. And that's a term that comes directly from Kurt Lewin, right? And we have I probably have this somewhere, but if you go to the Leicester conference from Tavistock, they talk about, how you can get trained to become a change agent. And I just did a show with William Ramsey on Charlotte Iserbyt. We actually did a tribute to Charlotte Iserbyt and to Constance Cumby. Last week's radio hour was on Constance Cumby. Unfortunately, she passed away, and Charlotte Iserbyt passed away a few years ago, and the two great heroes in my book. But Charlotte tells a story of how she was in Maine, which is near the National Training Laboratories, right? Bethel, Maine is where the National Training Laboratories are. And actually, the reason why they're in Bethel, Maine is because Kurt Lewin, who it was founded right after him, he created the concept that the National Training Labs, are modeled after. They tribute him on the website. And it was actually sponsored by the National Education Association. And so he had this theory that change agents could be better created if they were removed from their current environments. It had to be a remote environment, basically, so you can do these trauma bonding circles, and you can create the group dynamics. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But it was interesting because I was preparing for this, tribute to Charlotte Iserbyt, and I was listening to one of her videos, and she talked about how they had paid for her to go to a change agent seminar. And they talk about how, like, all the ways to recruit change agents and what to look for in the resistors, as they call them. So they wanted to weed out these resistors. And she says that basically they were teaching her how to weed her out. And she was, of course, furious and went back to blow the whistle on this, and how they were trying to use these change agents to change the course of the education system and to, as she called it, deliberately dumb down America. That's her book. Which it looks like they were quite effective. So she talks about how they're using it in the education system. They're using these change agents everywhere. So this the idea is that I think it was born, both Delphi method as well as this sensitivity training were born out of the post-World War II psychological research. And this, I'll read you a little abstract from It's War and the Practice of Psychotherapy, the UK Experience, 1939 to 1960. During the Second World War, it is argued the neuroses of battle not only deepened an understanding of psychological mechanisms, but also created opportunities for the practice of psychotherapy. While it is perceived efficacy led to the broader acceptance within medicine and society once peace had returned, this recognition is contrasted with the aftermath of the First World War. So I'm going to pause for a second. Those of you who've been following my work for a while know I've done a lot of work on, we've talked about Tavistock, the Tavistock Clinic, then the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, and lots of evidence points towards the Wellington House, which was the British War Propaganda Bureau that had its ties and kind of seeded what became the Tavistock Clinic. The Tavistock Clinic was, of course, in 1920, and the donation for that building, which was designated for shell shock therapy research, also known as post-traumatic stress disorder research on the soldiers during World War I, was actually given by the 11th Duke of Bedford, who was related to the Russell of Russell Trust, also known as Skull and Bones founder, along with Alfonso Taft, who's related to United States President Taft. But that was 1920. Then we had a grant from the Rockefellers in 1946, 47, and that's when they developed the Tavistock Institute of Human Relation. So I bring this up because it's very relevant here. In World War I, they were studying the individual soldier, right? The post-traumatic stress disorder, the shell shock therapy treatments that they were doing on the soldiers, because World War I, they were trying to figure out the effects of trauma on the individual. And then we get to World War II, and they decide that everybody's traumatized, and so now everybody becomes Tavistock's patient, essentially. So it gives them kind of carte blanche justification to do these mass-scale trauma-based mind control experiments. And I think they very much did. We've done lots of episodes discussing Operation Phoenix and the symbolism of the Phoenix, right? That's kind of what the Great Reset's all about. We've got to tear it down so we can build back better. And that's the imagery of the Phoenix. The Rosicrucian symbol is, you burn it down and it's a bird that rises up from the ashes. And the CIA Operation Phoenix was where we got that slogan, we have to burn the village to build the village. But before that, we had Tavistock's Operation Phoenix. And this was where they restructured to create the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. So just a little background on all of that. So the aftermath of the First World War, when a network of outpatient clinics set up by the Ministry of Pensions to treat veterans with shell shock were closed within a few years in response to financial pressures and doubts about their therapeutic value. In the private sector, psychoanalysis under the leadership of Ernest Jones remained an idiosyncratic activity, confined largely to affluent middle classes of London. According to Gregorio Cohen, it was strongly opposed by the general public, the church, and medical and psychiatric establishment, and the press. The Medical Psychological Clinic of London, originally set up in 1913, right around the time of the British War Propaganda Bureau, also known as the Wellington House, and World War I, offered psychotherapy on 3 afternoons a week in premises at 30 Brunswick Square under the direction of James Glover. However, it closed in 1923 after Glover and his brother, Edward, both had become psychoanalysts. As the First World War drew to a close, Maurice Craig helped to persuade Sir Ernest Cassel to fund a hospital for functional and nervous disorders at Penhurst, Kent, to treat neuroses in the civilian population. Although moved to permanent premises near Richmond, it remained small scale, and at the time no attempt was made to establish a network of similar institutions throughout the UK. The Tavistock Clinic opened in Bloomsbury in 1920, struggled to secure funding throughout the interwar period, and its efforts to win official recognition from the University of London were constantly rebutted. So remember, I talk about that book, The 50 Years of Tavistock by Henry V. Dix. He goes through that whole journey of them trying to find funding and how it was I can't remember, something of Kent. It might have been the Duke of Kent. I think it was the Duke of Kent, who they were so proud that they courted and they were able to get them to contribute financially, which they were saying was not just obviously helpful because they were seeking fiscal support, but also because they were trying to seek, credibility and recognition in the area and in the field. And so that was quite helpful to have this kind of PR with the Duke of Kent. So Despite epidemic of shell shock and other so-called war neuroses, psychotherapy remained a marginal activity during the 1920s and 1930s. During the Second World War or so, the argument goes, the need to return every psychiatric battle casualty to active duty, or the very least the productive employment in civilian life, created important opportunities for therapists. So remember, we have Shaping Psychiatry by War. This is John Rawling Rees, and this is where they take all of the concepts and the studies that they were doing on the soldiers, and they're now using this to mold the field of psychology based on the military practices and studies. So both psychiatrists and psychologists were recruited into the Royal Army Medical Corps, RAMC, where they experimented with novel treatment, drawing on ideas from psychoanalysis and social psychiatry and psychology. The work of Wilfred Bion, right? This is, we've done episodes on this as well, the leaderless groups, and he talked about the basic assumption work and the work groups. And the work groups were kind of more like a typical group project would be, right? Where you have individuals and they bring their unique skills, strengths, and talents, and you can see all of that reflected in the project itself. And then you have the basic assumption group, and that's where they create kind of a hive mind and everybody gets kind of dissolved into this group hive. So that was the work of Wilfred Bion, which is also very influential on the whole group dynamics concept, the Tavistock method. It's also very influential on what became the A.K. Rice Institute, which is known as kind of like the Tavistock of the United States. John Rickman and Michael Folks at Northfield and Maxwell Jones Mill Hill is said to have transformed the role of groups, while occupational, art, and individual therapies advance in psychiatric hospitals run by or for the military. Having proved their worth in wartime, these clinical services were adopted within the National Health Service and the private sector. So the NHS, remember, they partnered with Portman, right? So the Tavistock Clinic partnered with the NHS. And we saw this with the Tavistock Clinic and the GIDS Clinic, right? The Gender Identity Disorder Services, which was shut down not too long ago, a couple of years ago, with the whole scandal, you know, around 2022, I believe it was the Cass review that led to them being shut down because of what was going on with the kids and the gender disorder clinic. The war, it is suggested, had served as a significant catalyst for change and innovation. By way of reinterpretation, it is proposed here that wartime psychotherapy was not as efficacious as it claimed. Servicemen were not by and large returned to active duty, and many were downregulated or discharged after treatment. This is kind of interesting. I have a section in this Substack that I just wrote talking about how they've used these Delphi methods under the auspices of trying to help the military, the individuals, and with, you know, psychological issues. And they really, what they did was it was really geared towards operational success and towards performance. So this is interesting that they're saying that psychotherapy actually wasn't all that effective. And that's what you saw with a lot of these modalities that were derived from using Delphi methods. So it's very similar to what Charlotte Iserbyt talks about with outcome-based education, right? So it's performance-oriented rather than addressing the root, which would, you know, improve actual education, actual erudition, you know, and same thing with using the Delphi method for these various modalities of mental health in the military. It was found that it was much more geared towards performance than it was towards really improving the mental health of the soldiers, unfortunately. And I have many links in there so you can see all of the studies that were done. So hence when these, we'll go back. Servicemen were not by and large returned to active duty, and many were downgraded or discharged after treatment. Published accounts may have been biased by questions of morale to exaggerate clinical effectiveness, similar to what we found with the Delphi method in mental health in the military. Hence, when these techniques were introduced post-war health service, they were accompanied by expectations raised beyond what might be reasonably achieved. This occurred at a time when attitudes towards the nature of mental illness and role of psychotherapy, at least within psychiatry and psychology, were in a state of flux. In an economy characterized by rationing, finite resources placed severe constraints on what could be provided in the public sector, and these inflated results plausibility did no service to the long-term development of psychodynamic treatments. But obviously they were very insistent, and they did end up, implementing these. Let's skip ahead. I won't read the rest of this. I just wanted to read this part on the recruitment of therapists because I think it is very, very relevant. I have a whole section in the Substack article on the, you can download it from the CIA.gov, but I talk about it all the time, the mice to rascals, an alternative framework for agent recruitment. And they leave out change agents, but that is what they mean. They do talk about espionage and military assets, intelligence assets in that article, but it does seem they talk about how this was born out of the OSS, which was deriving those tactics and the testing from the British military. And I think it really came out of the War Office selection boards that Tavistock was doing during Operation Phoenix. I can't quite verify that just yet, but it really does look like that way. All roads point to that. And so it means that they were essentially creating these, what they called intelligence tests, in order to recruit change agents. And when they talk about these intelligence tests, that's what they're talking about, the various modalities that would lend themselves to somebody who could be groomed, who was resilient, and by resilient meaning that they could be traumatized, broken down, which means that they could be molded and shaped as a change agent, essentially. So obviously those are my words, that's not their words, but that's essentially what they say when you read these documents. So it's the belief that shell shock therapy, that shell shock could be prevented by selection and training. The armed forces had led military psychiatry slip into a decline during the interwar period. And by 1939, there were only half a dozen regular officers with varying degrees of psychiatric experience. Some were in administrative roles. The neglect led to a key appointment. On the outbreak of the war, John Rawlings Rees, the director of Tavistock Clinic, became consultant psychiatrist to the Army at home and responsible for the expansion of the service. This is what we're talking about, the shaping of psychiatry by war, and this is also the War Office selection boards. He became the consultant to the expansion of the service. Aware of the shortage of psychiatrists in the armed forces, Rees had begun to build up a list of potential recruitments before the war had been declared. These included Emmanuel Miller, a Tavistock-trained child psychologist, Eddie Bennett, a decorated veteran of the First World War, and Wilfred Byron, who was very instrumental in the whole Operation Phoenix restructuring that led to the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, who had recently begun an analysis with John Rickman. Bennett, an analytical psychologist and a friend of Jung, was ultimately sent to India, where he organized psychiatric services for the army in Southeast Asia. So it's actually a really interesting article. I won't read the rest of it. You can check that out. The title, if you are curious, it is called War and the Practice of Psychotherapy, the UK Experience, 1939 to 1960. So, okay, that gives you a little sense of how this Tavistock method was born out of, which is group dynamics, right? It was born out of the World War II psychology research. This is also where we get these sensitivity training, which is very similar to group dynamics, right? It's these when we did that whole episode where we went through this, but it is essentially these you're doing group consensus, but this is through essentially trauma bonding circles. And I have here where, yeah, I pulled this up before on shows, but in the 1974, you can get this from the CIA.gov also. They released statements questioning the use of sensitivity training. They indicated that group dynamics could destroy objective individual judgments as evinced in China's brainwashing program. They say that there's evidence that some people are harmed by this experience. I think it was William Spady. I might be wrong on this, but I think it was William Spady who did Mindspring or LifeSpring. That's what it was, LifeSpring. So I've shared this with you all before. How I did 2 different offshoots of Landmark Forum, which are essentially sensitivity training. That's basically what they are. But they're these, like EST type of groups. And one of them that I did, the trainer had been trained from LifeSpring. And so a lot of the LifeSpring, lots of LifeSpring trainees, I guess, are work for the UN. So I knew that at the time. I wasn't very aware at the time, so I didn't really put anything together. But a lot of them do work for the UN, and I think it was William Spady who said that it broke him. It was so traumatic that it he had like a break. But yeah, it says it's evidence that people are harmed by the experience. And William Spady, for those who aren't familiar, was one of the people behind outcome-based education with Shirley MacLaine, and also a big leader in the New Age movement. So in making these judgments, I recognize that self-reports, this is from CIA.gov, 1974, I recognize that self-reports of personal benefit tend to overwhelm the counsel of caution. I would point out that intensely emotionally involving group experience of any sort, which sensitivity training, T groups, encounter groups, right? Esalen was big on the encounter groups. So all of them definitely are that. Sets into motion a set of group dynamics that destroys objective individual judgment, a point illustrated most dramatically by brainwashing in China. They don't say this here, but I think they're alluding to the struggle sessions, right? Maoist struggle sessions. And less dramatically in any number of intensive group experiences designed to produce an attitude of change. The very power of these techniques argues as strongly as any other specific evidence for proceeding with caution. I would say so. So there you have it. So we've got this kind of background, and there's a book from Stuart Chase, The Proper Study of Mankind, and he actually says that the Delphi method has evolved into a process of separating supporters from detractors in small group situations so that a predetermined consensus could be manipulated by the facilitator. And that facilitator is essentially a change agent. So we'll get into what is a change agent. Before we do, I wanted to give a little background on the Tavistock method, mass psychological controlling. And that is, so if you go to the TavistockInstitute.org, it says, what is Tavistock Institute relations? What is Tavistock Institute group relations thinking? Introducing the core concepts in influential Tavistock approach. And they break down, and that's essentially what the Tavistock method is. They break it down, the core concepts of Tavistock group relations thinking, which is the Tavistock method, unconscious processes, a key idea in Tavistock thinking that groups, like individuals, have unconscious processes that influence behavior, decision-making, and relationships. These processes can include projections, transference, and other dynamics that are not immediately visible, but significantly affect the group's functioning. So again, how do we create a group mind? Authority and leadership. Group relations explore the concepts of authority and leadership within a group setting. It examines how authority is taken up, resisted, or delegated and distributed, and how leadership roles are assumed or denied within groups. This is often done through experiential learning in what is known as group relations conference, and that's like the Leicester. I don't know how to pronounce it. It looks like Leicester to me, but I know Brits will correct me, so I apologize. But that's essentially what that is. And when you go to that website and you look at the Leicester conference, which has been going on since 1957, they talk about how to become a change agent. And they have a whole section there where they're talking about that process, and it is essentially sensitivity training. It's these group dynamics where you do. They don't say trauma bonding circles, but that's essentially what it is. You do these group therapy where you make yourself really vulnerable. You share intimate, experiences with these strangers, and there's a lot of like role playing type games. And this is how you form these groups. So the group dynamics, essentially. So role and identity. Participants in the group relations work are encouraged to explore their roles within the group, both their formal roles that they are assigned and informal roles that they take on. The exploration of these roles help participants understand how group identity is formed. Again, group identity, right? That is really the crux of it. How individuals relate to the group's goals, right? So how the individual can serve the group. Boundaries and tasks. The significant focus on understanding the boundaries within groups, whether these are temporal, spatial, or psychological, the group's task and purpose. The clarity or blurring of these boundaries is seen as critical to the group's effectiveness. Systemic thinking. Tavistock thinking often involves viewing the group as a system with interdependent parts. And so these are terms we hear from the UN all the time, right? The interdependency, the systems thinking. So the perspective helps in understanding how changes in one part of the system can affect the whole and how the group interacts with the broader environment. Learning from experience, one of the distinctive features of the group relations work is its emphasis on learning through experience. Rather than providing theoretical knowledge up front, participants are placed in situations where they can observe and reflect the group processes as they unfold, often leading to profound insights. And so then they go on to talk about the various applications. They talk about organizations, right? This is like organizational psychology, corporate psychology, industrial psychology. This is all Tavistock's method that has been applied to those settings. Social change. The Institute has also applied its method to larger societal issues, exploring how the groups and organizations can contribute to social change. Therapeutic settings. So this is, group therapy, essentially. So that is the Tavistock method, and that began with the Tavistock Clinic back in 1932. And they say that this is involving mass psychological control, involving what Ekman referred to as the deliberate inducement of neuroses. So we have trauma-based mind control. That's essentially what it is. Suggesting this approach aimed to create psychologically controlled environments for manipulating populations through mass media and group dynamics. So the Tavistock Institute initiated the sensitivity training techniques in the United Kingdom and then collaborated with American behavioral scientists to refine these methods. The Institute conducted tests on American and British soldiers to determine whether under conditions of induced and controlled stress groups could be made to behave erratically. So they were intentionally inducing, high stress in order to see what the behavior would emerge and whether or not people would abandon their firmly held beliefs. So this is really like, how do we obliterate the core identity of a person in order to, blur the distinction. So we create these group identity as opposed to individual identity. And this is a quote, sensitivity training based on research on human behavior that came out of the efforts during World War II to ascertain whether or not the enemy's core beliefs and behavior could be modified by the application of certain psychological techniques. These techniques have been gradually perfected over the years by the efforts of business and industry leaders, so through corporations, right? So I always kind of make the joke, it's really not so funny, but that the corporate America, but really megacorps all over the world, it's just a lot of them do come out of the United States, are building the new world order. So so we've got the core beliefs. Sorry, I lost my place. World War II core beliefs could be modified by the application of certain psychological techniques. These techniques have gradually been perfected over the years by the efforts of business and industry leaders to persuade people to buy products, right? So that's like Edward Bernays, right? Including propaganda, marketing, PR, including the radio and television industry, to ascertain how an audience might be habituated to certain types of programming. So how do we get this evolution to the Delphi technique? So we've got the Tavistock method, which involves creating this controlled stress environments by group leaders, often change agents who have predetermined goals, right? To use peer pressure to gradually increase increments to intimidate the weaker individuals into conforming. And the method was refined and popularized by various schools of behavior science, including Esalen was very involved in this, the Western Training Laboratory groups, which, the national training laboratories were in Bethel, Maine, as we had mentioned. That was Kurt Lewin, 1947. So both of these methodologies have their roots in Kurt Lewin's work. So he created, group dynamics and behavior modification. Topological psychology is what it was called. There was a topological group, actually, and I read an interesting article about that and how that group came over to the United States. He was a Frankfurt School refugee, so he emigrated to the United States in 1933 when the rise of the Nazi Party, rise of Nazism in Germany. So he was described as the father of sensitivity training in the United States, and he was instrumental in developing systematic approaches to changing individual and group behavior. He worked at MIT and the National Training Laboratories, which was sponsored actually by the National Education Association, as we had mentioned before. And they established the theoretical framework that would influence both sensitivity training and consensus building techniques. So my theory is really that the Delphi method is more of a methodical, like a mechanistic variation of sensitivity training. And I did not realize we are totally running out of time. So I am going to skip ahead a little bit I just want to give you we did go through it in the video, so I guess you get a good sense of what the Delphi method actually is. But I will lay it out for you. So the essential components are anonymity, and this is to give you the sense that, it's kind of organic and grassroots, right? So you don't necessarily know who the change agent is, the facilitator. Control feedback. So experts receive statistical summaries, and they do this iteratively. So they keep doing that, where they give you these statistical summaries over and over again. Statistical group responses. So those results are presented quantitatively to show the distribution of the expert opinions. And then they do this over and over again. So those are the kind of the key elements of it. In round one, they bring an initial questionnaire gathering broad expert opinions on a topic. And then round two, they refine the questionnaires. They're trying to get rid of the outliers, right? So we're building consensus. And then based on the first round of results with statistical feedback that's provided to the participants. And then round three and so forth, they do additional rounds as needed until magically the consensus is manufactured or achieved. And so that's essentially the nuts and bolts of this method. And there are various, types. There's like the modified Delphi, and I'm not going to go into all of that because we don't have time. But you can read my article. I lay it all out in here. But the big point that I really want to make before we wrap up is the reason why I thought this was so important to go through is obviously it's being used, like the actual Delphi method and sensitivity training, definitely is being used in person groups, and change agents are being used everywhere. However, I think we're entering this new age with, algorithms and cybernetics, where they are able to use the Delphi method, but use it in a very unknowing, where it's really not transparent at all, and where it seems so organic, right? You're being fed through these cybernetic algorithmic feedback loops. You're being fed what you think is a consensus, right? But they're actually testing through these algorithms. So they're collecting all this data, and they're then based on that data, they're feeding you information. And so when you go into just to make this really concrete for people, if you go into your whatever app it is, whatever social media platform, and you go and you look, you have certain narratives that are, and part of it's done through dialectics, right? This is, they create these warring factions, and usually it's managed, right? It's fifth generation warfare. So you have these managed oppositions, and then through all this, very heated kind of debate, you start to see what looks like consensus to you. And that's being fed to you through these algorithms. So I feel like we're in a really dangerous age where we're in a new kind of space where this Delphi method can be utilized, and sensitivity training, because even online people are struggle sessioned, right? If you've spent enough time on any social media platform, I know you know what I'm talking about, and if you haven't, then keep it that way, because your sanity is spared. But between the bots and between manipulated scripts, and there's the funded influencers, and there's all different modalities, but you have these warring factions, and then you have this manufactured consensus, sorry. And so I think that that's very, very deceptive. And it creates these reality tunnels. We've talked about reality tunnels on previous episodes, but it warps you. It creates this epistemological warfare landscape where we're really battling over what is real and what is, are these just completely manufactured altogether, these consensus. So in this article, I go through kind of the origins of like Fourier, and the origins of the word epistemology. I talk about reactionary epistemology, which I think is very much a byproduct of this algorithmic cybernetic landscape. And I talk about reactionary epistemology, which comes out of bootstrap epistemology, which is this concept of independent kind of information gathering, which in general, I would be very supportive of, but it actually makes people very vulnerable to this kind of manipulation of, algorithmic Delphi method. So I'm out of time, but this was hopefully really informative. It's a really important topic, and it was way too much for me to cover, so I apologize, but I did write 16,000 word article on it. So if it's just something that's of interest to you, then please check it out and consider supporting my work. Unfortunately, this is my last radio hour, but I hope you've enjoyed the experience as much as I have. And if you'd like to see me return to WWCR Worldwide Radio, then head on over to my website and please support the work I'm doing. Thank you so much.